Change. My name is Ronald Allen, and we are talking about everything around the notion of change, life's changes. I wanted to create something different. Many of you may have gone to my website, ronaldmallen.com, gone over to the Managing Life's Changes pages, and you'll see kind of a history, an archiving of various platforms that I've been on for the last, I would say, the better part of 20 years. And I'm one of those media individuals that, no, I haven't received or reached a celebrity claim and level of recognition. On the other hand, I simply enjoy what I'm doing. And I think that is also a position, a state of mind, and a reality that many of us can value. Of course, there are those that wish that limelight. Unfortunately, just as we like to believe that is what we're looking for, the reverse is also true. It can destroy relationships, it can become unsettling for the individual. Demands are put on us, requests, expectations, and we've seen that across all industries, all professions. Um, I like to start off with a little meditation, and I'm not going to ask you to be silent. Conversely, I'm going to say, what do you subscribe to as your form of meditation? Yesterday, I shared with you a few um, statements and comments on how people and how individuals go about their daily meditations. You wake up in the morning, you may do a prayer, you may recognize the sound of the birds, which, if you listen carefully, they're out there all the time, welcoming the day in anticipation of what the day will bring. Now, of course, as humans, we can bring in that mental thought process and we can decide how we want our day to go. And it's very important when you come out of that alpha state of sleep and you begin to recognize your body's breathing, your body can move, you're in bed, you're on the sofa, maybe you're on a chair. Perhaps, unfortunately, you're in a car because you are uh, real estate wise homeless. That's a whole state of mind, by the way. We can get into that when we talk about realities of life. Because we may not conform to what society is saying we should, does that mean we're less capable? I submit to you that that is not the case. Um, so start your day with a little meditation. Another construct of meditation, which is what I've been doing for some years, is juicing. This is my celery. It is an apple, red apple, ginger root, raw ginger root, and to flavor orange juice. Now, it's not a sugar-based orange juice. There's a farmer's market up in Trenton, New Jersey, which is the capital state. And there has been this market, Polish, Ukraine, Slavic, Russian, they all live there. And part of their community is made up of a old-fashioned farmer's market and a dairy. and we go there for our juices. So I'm telling my body, I'm telling my mind that I want it to feel nourished. That's the communication. That's my point when I talk about meditation. It can be talking to yourself. It can be going for a walk. It can be sitting still. It can be sitting up. It is reflection of the day before, the night of sleep, where the body goes into um, rejuvenation. And we'll talk about that as well. There's a great study by a scientist, I think he's in the Netherlands, and he's studying circadian rhythms of children when they get up and go to school and how they optimize and they are effective with their studies. And I believe, and I'll share it with you as we go along and develop more programming, a 45-minute difference. And I believe they're actually able to push back the time frame of school. They are more engaged. They've found them more attentive to their studies, their environments, and most importantly, polite, collegiate, being polite to one another. Right? You'll notice that I love to try and develop my vocabulary. Excuse me, correct that. I develop my vocabulary. You don't try. There are some mantras we still have to work on. So today's program, Generation Gap, that's the theme. And I have a video, and I'm hoping this works. The video I placed on my social media, and I did it years ago. This is when I started utilizing websites, utilizing interview face to face out in the public. And I literally went to places that I thought could have that kind of conversation, that level of engagement. And I said to the store owner, I think it's called Game Workshop. Game Workshop, there you go. I'm looking up on my board there. Game Workshop. And I said to them, I'd love to interview your patrons while promoting your store. Well, there has to be a hook, right? It has to be. You have to give them some benefit, some value. And they will absolutely. They, in fact, sent me 50 tickets at the time. There was this big conference coming up for games. It wasn't just electronic games. It's the type of games that people actually look at and talk with one another while they're executing the game itself. And they use small pieces, figurines, if you will, small figurines, 1, 2, 3 inches tall. And some of them were dragons and flying pterodactyls, dinosaurs, and others were warriors and gladiators, and of course the pawns, the infantry, the archery, right? All these little characters. What I was attracted, how I was attracted to this was the fact that as a kid, that's what I did. But we engaged in military regiments of the First, Second World War, and we painted them. And we even took airplanes and we took battleships and we painted them and we identified them with the colors, the signage, right, the symbolism that they represented. Well, fast forward into the future, now whole companies were being created and funded and were able to offer customers, consumers, that same experience. And I found it very, very interesting. So I want to play a little bit for you. I'm going to play. Let's see if this works, okay? Just 1 second. Again, this is all about engagement. So you must be flexible, understanding. Let's see what happens.
Every Games Workshop, and I think this one is a good example of it too, specifically, there is such a diverse crowd, let alone age groups. We'll get anybody playing from 8 years old to 60. The great thing with that is, even though there's that age gap, you have a common bond because you either have hobby advice that you can pass on to different people. I've seen 12-year-olds give 45-year-olds painting advice, and it's really, really good to see that. It plays a big part in just being real, like talking to real people. There's different games and things you can play, over the internet or computers, but there is something about this that it's just, because it's real and in person, it's very much more about, rapport and talking to people and meeting people.
Swimming without feeling
There,
the blue
indicator, would like to have reserved. Just having her on weekends with me, she's seen the little models. Most of the armies that I usually do involve, she likes all the little girls. And I've always encouraged her as far as creativity, so I've never stopped her from trying something. So some of the smaller stuff I've had her do, which is called dry brushing. She can't prime because she, why?
Well, sometimes, like,
Yeah, well, because the cans are big.
Sure.
But the dry brushing part is essentially just, as far as the paint part, it's just, I don't even show this dry brush. Simple process.
Yep.
The model's primed black already.
Yep.
You're taking as minimum amount of paint as possible and just brushing it over there. So a lot of the metals that are done on the army itself is what this particular army she's actually already done.
She painted those.
Yes. So anything that's done in metals, which would be like the backpacks, the weapons, she actually did these for me.
swimming
These pieces I created from
So there you get the whole message of engagement. And I just love that piece because it's timeless. It stretches all generations. And to the theme of today, there's no such thing as a generation gap. It's an interest gap. Once again, I refer back to my own experience coming up through school, having been associated with young men who were literally from all over the world. And that richness is not necessarily appreciated at that time. It certainly is not understood at that time. What I did recognize was, on the one hand, there was this message that certain people were preferred over others. Certain groups and nationalities were looked at with disdain. And yet, when I spoke to the individual that seemed to represent the nationality, there was a disconnect. It wasn't true that they exhibited what the social noise said and what they did, what they represented. Just as with generation gap. I know we talk about all the horror of life, absolutely. And the louder you turn on that volume, the more traumatic your mind responds to, right? If you're exposed to good, you have a tendency to seek out good. If you're exposed to trauma and ugliness, then that's what you're going to exhibit. The mind is programmable. That's really what is happening. And interestingly enough, humans are probably the only creature that can take chunks of time and associate their existing and possible extrapolation future behavior to that time of exposure to life. So there's a bigger request here. Is it possible that we can live beyond our time frame, our existence? And most importantly, are we capable of managing our mental state, therefore physical expression of the time and the exposure to engagement, to voices, to propaganda, to marketing, to influences in our lives? That's really where we're going with this, isn't it? If you are taught a certain way, and at some point something triggers that it ain't working, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't too cool here. Something's disconnected. Then now you're on a path We spoke yesterday of auto industry designing car names: Discover, Navigator, Explorer. Can we take that verbiage, that messaging, and make it our own? Can you subscribe? Social media, right? Just click, just click, just click. Don't worry. It's only $2 for the first month or two, and then we'll jack you up. Can we subscribe to what we want? First of all, we have to find it. First of all, we have to seek it. First of all, we have to even know that it might exist. Oh, a construct called hope. So when we talk about game generation, I'm confusing my tomorrow's discussion. When we talk about generation gaps, that's for the statistician. That's for the federal agency that has to quantify funding for any particular purpose, any particular need. Conversely, when we look at environments and communities, human in socialization, there is a bond because of experience, because of exposure, because of need, because of desire. And it's when we arrest our mental process to be on purpose. That's why I come back. You'll hear me repeat. What are you doing in the morning? What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, when you come out of your alpha state? Do you even know you're in an alpha state? Alpha state, I'm in bed. Then you start to direct that communication with yourself and with outside. I'll give you some examples. I've started this little idea of writing down. It's almost like a diary, if you will, but it's not. Emotional highs and lows. You're going through the day. Someone says something to you. Someone requires something of you. Someone sends you a text. Someone leaves you a voicemail. Someone writes down a note and leaves it on your desk or your electronic tablet, dare I say. Who writes anything anymore? Everything electronic, digital. How is it received? And most importantly, how are you arresting your emotional response to that incoming message? Another observation are latest hate crimes. Again, to me, and the way I see the reporting of abuse of people, is that whether it's the authorities, the military, social groups that are verbally and physically attacking people, we ask the question, why? What is it that's going on in their lives, their belief, their disconnect with that other entity, why they need to behave in that fashion? More importantly, and this is interesting because France 24, the news station, has a great promo that shows what about the stories that go unreported? Does the event even exist? Has it actually occurred? You know the metaphor for the tree falling in the woods, nobody's there. Does it make a sound? Yes, it does. And Bertrand Russell speaks about that philosophical perspective to life. So when we think of these generation gaps, right? Latest hate crimes, is it because we're so disconnected and therefore fear and insecurity takes the high road and everything else is basically tarred and feathered? It's an English term, Irish and English term there for you. We scrap for sales. How about, we script for sales. Here's another one. We talk about generation gaps. We script for sales. How about scripting with emotional intelligence when we engage with one another. And I put down family because, again, that's one of those dynamics that we call it history. And if you don't understand the history, you're not going to break through the angst of that kind of relationship. And even the best, so-called best, externally looking, you're looking from the outside. You don't understand the history, the years of socialization within the family. So if we can script for a public relations piece, if we can script for a marketing piece, if we can script for an advertising promo piece, why can't we use that same approach, that same methodology when we're about to engage with family and it's not such a pleasant experience or discussion? Remember, I said yesterday, and I've used this approach even when I was doing Blog Talk Radio on managed change on Blog Talk Radio, which was an strictly internet-based platform. And even when I was doing terrestrial radio with our program in Bala Cynwyd, New World Radio, again, I'm going to refer you to the site, my site, Ronald M. Allen. Look up the tags, support, go down to Managing Life Changes, and you'll see those 3 or 4 iterations, if you will, using different platforms. The message is the same. Managing Life's Changes. How can we help one another to take a moment, take a pause, take a breath, reflect of what is the desired outcome? Now, of course, if someone says, I'm going to beat you to death, well, that's the desired outcome. That's unfortunate. So you better get on your crocodile skin and buffalo hide and get in there. That also is part of the reality of engagement. Sometimes it's an ugly affair, absolutely, and you must be aware of that. You must be willing to understand that not everyone has a sensitivity of working mutually together, mutually beneficial outcomes. So if you understand the 2 extremes, now you can say, what resources do I need? What resources are at hand? What mental fortitude must I have? I'll give you another example when we talk about generation gap. And by the way, does generation gap simply mean age? Well, I don't think so. I think generation gap can be any misalignment. Take governance of a committee putting out a social program. Take governance of setting up protocol, policies and procedures of how different tiered levels of leadership, all the way down to the frontline customer-facing employee, and even those who are in the back who nobody sees. If they are passive aggressors and look to sabotage an initiative by leaving waste in a public environment when there is going to be a gathering, where there are people or individuals who will sabotage an initiative by not bringing funds to the table at the right time, they're seen as a gap in communications that someone hasn't taken the time to identify that stakeholder's true intent, right? True intent. It takes a little longer. Yet, the research shows if you don't take that time, then the other stakeholders, the other members in your family, the other people that you're working with, your colleagues, will not give 113%. They won't go across the finishing line. So you're wasting that intellectual opportunity. I talked about that when we talk about women. We're all gung-ho in hospitals and research centers and fraternities, even sorority, well, of course, sororities, fraternities, to see a European background there. They'll spend billions of dollars on breast cancer, but God forbid we pay women the same salary. Just that reality, just that blend, right? You're looking at one, looking at the other. So when we think of generation gap, I like to look at the broadest possible application and then begin the conversation. Because if you get stuck in the mud, you'll get stuck in the stinking thinking and the adversarial approach that is typical among a lot of conversations. When I'm working with companies, helping their employees, especially in the customer service environment, the technicals are understood. We know how to be polite. We do it all the time with our family, friends, colleagues, when we go for a job, when we ask for a promotion, when we look for a salary increase, when we're seeking a better lifestyle. We're on automatic. That stuff is easy. The hard part is when you're doing it day in and day out, and you have management telling you one thing, policy and procedures telling you something else, and then you've got a whole other level of engagement on the floor with the customer, because the customer brings a perspective that's not in alignment with the process that you, the employee, can execute on and have the authority and liberty to help them with. So there's a disconnect. There's a generation gap, if you will. So what else are we talking about today? This is a great, I like this video. There's another video I have where we went into Philadelphia, and I've still got to find it, and I'll do another program on that one. And it was really talking about people dealing with life's changes. And I've thought about going out into some marketplaces again, the Slavic marketplace up in Trenton. I like it because there's got to be like 50 different nations all converging in this marketplace to get food and vegetables and produce and milk and dairy products and butter and bread and cheese. Oh, they have a great selection of cheese. And they're nicely, cutely presented in these little pouches. Half a pound, 1 pound of cheese. Take it home with your preserves. Here's a question. How many of you have tasted gooseberry preserves? My mother introduced me to this. Oh, goodness. I can't remember. Seems like another lifetime ago. And we've been trying to find it locally. There's a German vendor in the marketplace. And now this is a different market, Columbus Market, down the road here. She's kind of obnoxious and rude. I'm not sure why. So we've chosen not to go back there. And it's not the cheapest product. At the same time, it's not the most expensive. Once again, a generation gap. It is interesting. And the reason why I bring this one up, this is a kind of a sensitive one. This could be kind of sensitive. As I was growing up, the Germans and the Japanese were the enemy. Yet, in my research on business and industry, we found that the captains of industry were engaged in trade and creating terms of trade with those same countries and those same nationalities as the general conversation message throughout Europe, and certainly in America, because you did drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan and said, now there's peace. And then you sent in Dr. Edward Deming to help rebuild their industrial complex. So you see, there's a massive disconnect. If you don't know these things, you won't understand a lot of the different levels, I call them tiers of communication, different levels of communication that come out of, for example, the international news stations, the international business reporting stations. Very different perspective, right? Their interest for industrial investing as opposed to consumer investing, totally different. It's the same thing when Christmas comes around and corporations have to make sure their financials are in line with the interests of their stakeholders. And excuse me, a little old employee, you are the pawn, right? And if you've been around more than 5 or 10 years, you know the cycle, you know the game as it's played. Just as in any sports, there are certain moves. I'm thinking of tennis, for example. Played a lot of tennis. In cricket, okay, you put a certain bowler against a certain batsman. In rugby, you play certain players, you play certain plays. I know American football, you got your shoulder me pads, you got your glasses. God forbid your little fingers get cold, so you need gloves, and then you need a kerchief, right? You know that little towel you see the football players wearing. I said to a guy the other day, he must have been like 400 pounds. I must have been insane. I figured he would respect the generation gap that I was much older. And I said, all you need now is a butler on the field to play the game and you're done, you know? You got all these protections, the helmet. And they said, well, yeah, we bash into each other. I said, well, so do pit bulls and what is it? Antlers and deers and with deers with antlers. They do the same thing. Doesn't mean they're sophisticated or strategic in their game plan. But anyway, I love to tease Americans about their football and the attire you need to play the game, let alone the two sets of offensive and defensive teams that you have. Not sure why my phone is going totally berserk here. I was wondering if we could possibly get some action on these platforms. We'll have to work on that. So anyway, going off into a little tangent there with American football. I'll tell you this, and I was privy to meet a gentleman, Lawrence Mealy, who is vice president of the Bluecoats, which is the D League for the 76ers in Delaware. Big deal, very big deal when I realized how vulnerable players are to the competition. And I said to him, it would be really cool if we could put together American football and European rugby and work out some of the logistics and see how that morphs into a whole other game. Because you need the heavy players, you need the blockers, you need the sprinters, you need those that can execute quickly and change up as the game is played out. That is managing life's changes. Having that mindset is absolutely crucial. Just checking my time here. When we think of change, my sister shared this with me many years ago. And I was kind of surprised how accurate the statement is. You must win on many or most of the small challenges you have in life. Because the bigger challenges, the bigger tsunami changes, also call them wicked change, they can be worked out. They can be drawn out. And so the game is a long-term game. You heard me say just yesterday when Henry Kissinger was negotiating with Koreans and Vietnamese and other Eastern country leaders, the Americans would rent a hotel, whereas their, I don't want to say adversaries, at the same time they would rent a chateau. Very different perspective coming to the table. So we can take that same approach in life. There are things that you will have to address today. There are projects I have to deal with today, and I will deal with those. There are some which will play out over the next week and months ahead, and I will strategize my game plan accordingly and adjust as necessary, right? I will also consider my long term. And many of us just think about, for example, retirement. And perhaps now with India, Japan, many other countries on the continent of Africa, having a burgeoning middle class, which they never had before because of economics, because of technology, because of the access to capital and the terms under which can be favorable, you're going to find that the social construct of engaging with family and friends and colleagues and business associates is going to change. There was a great post we did about gamification, and people from, again, actually specifically from South Africa, many others from other parts of the continent of Africa, Nigeria being one, they were gamers. Now, their approach, their environment under which they come to the gaming world, is that they still have to go to school, they still have to work, they still have their responsibilities with their families, and then they have the game. Then they develop their skills and abilities with gamification. So they may have an old chair like this, right? It's an old wookity chair. It's comfortable for me, not if you have to sit for 2 or 3 hours intensely working at a game where your spine is in a less than opportune position. Whereas many from Australia and Europe, certainly from America, they're actually paid, they're sponsored to do this day in and day out. So their whole mindset, 113% of the time, is fixated on strategy, on tactical, strategic, the whole bit, the whole focus is that. So what can we learn from that? How does the engagement required to work with one as opposed to another differ? And ironically, yet historically, those that have seemingly less opportunity are breaking through those lead ceilings, those lead clouds of opportunity. It's really encouraging yet disappointing to see those who are marginalized, they still seek out life, because that's really what it is. Communication is saying, I want to live. I know. I went down that proverbial rabbit hole with Trekkie, William Shatner, Kirk is voir dired by this alien female voluptuous creature, and they get him into a state of basically he's gonna die, and he belches out, but I want to live, I want to live. That's what we're all saying in our own little ways. I want life, I want breath. I'm not going there with Floyd. I'm talking about an age-old human desire, whether it is Thailand, whether it is Venezuela, whether it is Northern Ireland, quite frankly. It is all about communicating and allowing the other person space to exist. The notion that you can't or there isn't enough space is specious. It's a lie. It's a lie. When you have 1 or 2 people, 1%, 2% of the people having gold, solid gold fixtures around their house, and the type of wealth that they themselves can't spend over the next 5 generations, you must then communicate. You must engage in that other side, which says, how can we elevate the species? How can we elevate our conversation to allow everybody to rise up? Or are we still primitive, mentally insecure, unwilling, not just unable, we are capable of doing it. We're unwilling to see that other side of the same coin, that we're saying, no, there is a pecking order, there's a hierarchy. Absolutely, there is in nature. We see that. That's purely for survival. There is a pecking order, purely for survival. What we're referring to here, what I'm referring to here, is a communication that says, I can, I want to, I will cannibalize you. Big difference, big difference. So I want to play a little bit more of this video because I think it's pretty cool. I'm hoping when it does get out, this video does get out, people will respond to it and give me their feedback and maybe some stories that you've had, some engagements that you've had. One realization I'm also comfortable with, and I think it's partly because we're at home working together. We wake up in the morning, we have to start work, we have to take care of the kids, we have to take care of our pets. Traffic is closer by. There is that background engagement. At the same time, which is interesting, because we used to work in an office, there was a certain background noise which was acceptable, yet we did minimize it as much as possible. Today, that communication is changing the dynamics. The baby running in when someone's being interviewed, for example, the dog, or even the bird calling out as someone's on a phone or having a conference with a virtual meeting. Before I play the next section of the video, we have a little time here. Yeah. There was a really cool video which communicated everything in terms of generation gaps, where an English financial reporter, editor, if I'm not mistaken, was talking to Bloomberg. His babies ran in, the nanny ran in, and you could see the structure totally shifting. The acceptance level of that, oh my goodness, what's going on here, totally shifting to, it's okay, this is a human experience. I wonder if we can seek out that more than the hostility that we seem to exhibit. Maybe, perhaps, maybe we need to communicate to reporters and news stations that their way of creating angst, of creating trauma in some cases, when people have been traumatized, it can come back, right? They can re-experience that. Maybe that's the message we should send. So I'm going to play a little bit more of this video, and I'm hoping that it'll continue. If not, I'll try to fast forward it. Let's see.
Every game is workshop, and I think this one is a good example of it too. Specifically, there is such a diverse crowd, let alone age groups. We'll get anybody playing from 8 years old to 60. The great thing with that is, even though there's that age gap, you have a common bond because you either have hobby advice that you can pass on to different people. I've seen 12-year-olds give 45-year-olds painting advice, and it's really, really good to see that. It plays a big part in just being real, like talking to real people. There's different games and things you can play, over the internet or computers, but there is something about this that it's just, because it's real and in person, it's very much more about, rapport and talking to people and meeting people.
Swimming without feeling
There,
the blue.
Vindicator, Reserve. Just having her weekends with me. She's seen the little models. Most of the armies that I usually do involve, she likes all the little girls. And I've always encouraged her as far as creativity, so I've never stopped her from trying something. So some of the smaller stuff I've had her do, which is called dry brushing. She can't prime because she, what?
Well, sometimes, like,
Yeah, well, because the cans are big.
Sure.
But the dry brushing part is essentially just, as far as the paint part, it's just, I don't even show this dry brush. Simple process.
Yep.
The model's primed black already.
Yep.
You're taking as minimum amount of paint as possible and just brushing it over there. So a lot of the metals that are done on the army itself is what this particular army she's actually already done.
She painted those.
Yes. So anything that's done in metals, which would be like the backpacks, the weapons. She actually did these for me.
Swimming with
These pieces I created from a combination of different boxes that are available at Games Workshop, and I used the different pieces in my collection to represent a piece of artwork. In one of their books, there's several very good pieces of artwork that has to do with a specific section of Space Marines, and that's what I tried to represent. So they all have gold armor and they carry different weapons, so with a combination of different kits I was able to pull it off.
hands put in golden mittens, and I wonder, I wonder about the snow.
Brought you to this art form, this medium?
I've always liked role playing, and I've really liked like the fantasy setting, like medieval and like magic and everything. So one day my friend called me up and he said, you know, I heard about this new place called Games Workshop. You want to come down and take a look at it with me? So I went down with them the next day, and the guys that worked here, they showed me a demo game, and I really liked it. So I decided to, you know, start playing it. I don't pay too much, but I really like playing the game itself.
This is actually the second thing I've ever painted in my entire life,
Okay.
which is why
You've done a heck of a job.
thank you.
It's a heck of a
That's
job.
why I'm so proud of it. Took me forever.
Yeah. And that's important though. That's what it's all about. What would you say to other youngsters who have an interest but not sure where to start?
Just come in and look at the wall and find a race of things that you like the look of, because you can't go wrong. You really can't go wrong with anything you choose. But if you want to make sure that you enjoy the hobby to its fullest potential, play something that you like how it looks, that you enjoy the backstory of, because that'll make, you know, everything that you do with them more rich and exciting for you. For me, anyway.
Mittens, and I wonder.
Why is it that we have such a diverse age group coming in to enjoy this hobby?
At the core of it, I think there's still no matter what, it's a game, you know. And I'd like to think, I mean, I know myself, like I'm always going to be a kid at heart, you know. And then games, of course, have been something that we just learned from day one.
Okay.
And unlike some games like tic-tac-toe, yeah, you're not going to call your buddy up and say, hey, Friday night, let's have a beer and play tic-tac-toe. But something like this, as long as there's a bond that you already have established anyway, and you know you're not afraid of doing the paints and you know helping each other that way, and then that can be shared regardless. You know, if the kid's 12 years old, he likes to play games, and if he's 60 and hears he likes to play games, people will just walk in with their cases, and the game is no further away than just saying, you know, you see the case, like, hey, you want to get a game in?
The community as well, since we were talking a little bit about the diversity in the age groups, whether the person is 12 or 60, as the example I gave before, if a 20-year-old comes in here and he has no idea what anything is, that 12-year-old is going to be able to help him. The 60-year-old is going to be able to help him. They're going to know that at some point in their hobby career, they were this guy, so that they're very accepting to everything too. So I mean, the community 100% helps get new people in as well.
Wondering.
So there you see, there's so much. That video is so rich. And I took down some notes, and I just want to finish up our program today, our talk, our discussion. It said the backstory. What is your backstory in terms of when you engage with people? We talk about what is your expectation, right? What are you looking for? What is the outcome, desired outcomes? Just like a business, you have a mission, you have a vision, you have a strategy, you even work in your operational plans, how things will be actually granularly, at a granular level, decomposing each of the steps in order to deliver the good service or benefit. At the same time, what is the backstory that drives you? You've heard of the proverbial story of the mother hearing the child screaming, The mother runs out of the house. Charles is pinned underneath the car. Mother lifts the car. It is the urgency that we have. It is the association, the meaning we subscribe to things that makes the engagement win or lose. What is your backstory? What keeps you going? Or at the slightest resistance and pushback, you throw up both hands and give up, right? So that's another aspect of that video. And I found it years later just as impactful, perhaps partly because of the times we're living in, partly because of the realization of the continuation of the struggle of good, bad, pros and cons, them against us, you against me. I just find that primitive. I find that a waste of your capabilities, your desired day, your ability to even have a day. We have a mantra in the house that every year we have a little slogan. And this one, which we've been going on now, actually 2, if not 3 years, is thank you, Lord, for life while we sleep. Thank you, Lord, for life to wake. We ask that you guide our thoughts for whatever time you give us. And all you have to do is look at the coroner's reports in terms of dying at 6 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning. They got to work and they had a heart attack, especially on a Monday. It's known, medical research shows that many people, more people have heart attacks on a Monday than any other day during the week because they hate their job. So the backstory is disliking their job. Why are you at the job? I got to pay bills and got responsibilities. What put you into those situations that you didn't foresee or didn't respect where you were going? That's communications. That's effective communications. It impacts personal, professional, and private lives. Creative. We have to be creative. I mentioned before, there are 3 absolute crucial aspects of all of our developments. One being we must always be learning. We must be exposed, sensing, touching, tasting, feeling, hearing, right? Intuitive selves. That's part of learning. It's not in a school or for the last year or so, remote settings on these devices. Creativity, right? Engagement, meaningful engagement, healthy engagement, healthy engagement. You know the phrase, do things right. No, do things correct, the best of your ability, but do them correctly. Optimize that execution. Look at, especially in sports, right? The execution. Actually, in opera and orchestras, I was thinking, or in an orchestra, execution is everything. The sound of the skin as it strums the strings, right? The sound of the voice, the not even the voice, but the air as you blow through the pipe, right? A flute, a horn, saxophone, a clarinet. Execution. It is the engagement, being on purpose, listening to that sensitivity. And we do that also, of course, in negotiation. And we change what you need to listen to so you expand your repertoire of what you use, right? You expand your repertoire of what you use. So if you're in music, you're playing an instrument, how can you learn from a practitioner who cooks food? How can you learn from the psychologist's application of listening to their clients, their patients? How can we learn, go back in time and relearn the sensitivity of a child to their environment that causes them to go left or right? That's where this gets really, really interesting. If you discount it, that's fine. Remember, I said before, sometimes it'll be nice, sometimes it'll be quite ugly. Let's continue. Kids at heart. Well, there you go. That's everything. Because you can't take yourself that seriously. There have been millions of people who've gone before you who have gone through the same thing you've gone through. Yes, right now for you, what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, what you're on purpose for is absolutely crucial. At the same time, you blow a gasket, it's all over. You break, it's all over, right? Humpty Dumpty. These riddles have meaning. They subscribe to a mindset that if you cross that line, that's who you are. Kids at heart. That is so incredibly powerful. And I love it when I get a chance every now and again, not too often now, to be around the young kids where you see them developing and you watch the parents and you watch the teachers and instructors and you can see almost a yearning to go back in time. You see them like, oh my goodness, I wish I could have done that again. I could have done it differently, right? So be a kid at heart, and you can still be that way if you don't take yourself too seriously. Details, details, details. This builds self-efficacy. This builds who you are, what you're all about, right? Details, details. So many people, well, that's just too much trouble. Oh, that's too deep. I hated that expression when I first came to America. And I've talked to people, no big deal. And some people would express themselves and say, oh, dude, that's too deep, you know. I'll tell you what's deep. And I say this so many times. Go to a hospice center, go to a dementia center, go to a cancer ward. Speak to the people that can still speak, that can still express themselves. And the woulda, shoulda, coulda is so painful. Self-efficacy, diversity, age gap. That's what this discussion theme is all about. Age gap. There's no such thing as an age gap. It's an interest gap. It's a lack or undesire, a lack of desire to understand the other person, to be around that other person, to learn from that other person, to value that other person. And we are so steeped in this rut of identity. It's quite pathetic when there's so an eclectic view of the world that we haven't, what we have not learned. You know, there's a great phrase. It says, once I was young and I thought I knew everything. As I got older, the burden was lifted. That is such a timeless phrase that you can check yourself with, right? As you get older, as you have more experiences, as you engage with different nationalities, cultures, time frames, it changes everything. And of course, development. Our physical externals, extremities will shift no matter what, right? I know on a lot of these social posts and communities, they love showing you people then and now, you know, and that is how you see the development that's a healthy development and development that just, well, it just is. So another interesting discussion. I trust hope is very powerful. It must be followed up with action. So when we talk about engagement, when we talk about conversation, when we talk about managing life's changes, we must draw on the broadest possible resources at hand, be willing to be flexible, be willing to be a kid at heart, yet be vigilant to those that may seek us harm, and be quick to move on, disassociation, and move on. Those are all forms of communications. It is not I love to say Peter Pan, Mary Poppins evaluation, right? It's not that kind of assessment. That is a Hollywood context. Life is certainly a challenge, and at the same time, it's an opportunity to grow and learn from one another. So until we meet again, I trust you'll have a pleasant day. You will be on purpose. Let's see whether we have a musical score bed here. We're still learning a lot of this stuff, and it's still a lot of fun. 63 going on 6. Can you dig it?